hath awakened from its slumber. Feast your eyes on our illustrious prince and princess, eager to devour your souls, and their court of phantoms, excited to dine on their leftovers. Mark my words, you cannot escape our grasp. We can feel your fear. Prepare thyselves to confront thine inevitable fate, because tonight we feast on fear.
Hello everyone, 5 Minute here. Hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. Well, we have reached the end of this year's haunt season. Now I know we're all sad to see it go, but we all seem to have tons of fun in 2024. Now we as haunt fanatics have to hibernate for a solid 9 to 10 months until things get spooky again. But while we're closing out haunt season, I figured this was the perfect time to share my thoughts on one of the biggest haunt events out there, Halloween Horror Nights. Now 2024 for me was interesting, because every year I get the frequent fear pass, so I always try to go as many nights as possible to get the most bang for my buck. But as of this recording, I've only gone 4 times this year. I wanted to go more often, but I couldn't due to some personal reasons that I'd rather not get into. And I know it may sound toe deaf that I'm complaining about going only 4 times when there's some people out there that can't even afford to go once. So I'm not too bummed out about all that. But anyways, let's move on. The maze announcements were a big step up from last year, which to be honest isn't really a high bar because the announcement season from last year was like getting my teeth pulled out. The majority of the maze lineup did consist of IPs that we've seen a bunch of times at Horror Nights already, and I know a lot of fans love seeing their favorites come back, but I personally would have rather seen Universal try new things than recycle the same old same old. Also, there was this whole big deal with the crowds from last year. There were so many people that like half of the line queues reached full capacity, and how the new early entry system did more harm than good to the 7 o'clock crowds. Yeah, 2023 was atrocious when it came to crowds. So walking into this year's HHN had me very cautious while still being optimistic. So similar to my previous Horror Nights reviews, here's what's going to be the rundown. I'm going to rank the houses from worst to best, discuss my thoughts on this year's Terror Tram, and talk about any other miscellaneous thoughts I have on the event, such as scare zones, shows, etc. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, before I start talking about my ranking, I just want to preface that I don't think there were any mazes this year that I would call bad. My least favorites were still kind of, alright or mid. I wouldn't call any of them unenjoyable. Let's kick the ranking off with my number 8. And unfortunately, my least favorite maze is going to be Universal Monsters Eternal Bloodlines. And I actually hate to put this one at the bottom because this house had so much potential. There were glimmers of greatness scattered throughout this maze. Some of the scenes featured were genuinely top tier, the story was amazing, and the costumes and masks were incredible. There is a great house hidden somewhere in Eternal Bloodlines. However, I don't know if they ran out of budget or if their hearts weren't in this one, but it ended up being lackluster. I think the creative team didn't really do much with this premise. It was like they reused a lot of set pieces from previous Universal Monsters mazes, threw in an abundance of black walls, and called it a day. An all-female cast of monsters in the middle of a wintry, snowy setting? If the creative team really went all out with that concept, this could have easily been top 3 Universal Monsters houses. But unfortunately, it just felt like everyone was tired of the classic monsters and just prioritized the other houses instead. And that's why Eternal Bloodlines is my least favorite house of the year. Moving on to number 7. Now this placement is a bit controversial because I know a lot of people really enjoyed this house, but I had to be honest with myself, it just wasn't that good in my opinion. And that house is going to be Insidious the Further. Now I know, a lot of you really like this one, but believe me, I really wanted to love it too. This is one of the houses I was most excited for this year. Insidious from 2015 is my number 1 favorite Horror Nights maze, not only because it was super scary, but also because they adapted the franchise so well. They brought it back a couple years later to promote the movie with the key demon, and outside of the ending, which had 5 monsters scaring you non-stop, it overall wasn't very good. When I first experienced this version of the maze, I did like it, but after going through it again multiple times, hoping to like it more and more, I ended up liking it less and less. I have tried and tried and tried to see the maze that y'all love so much, but I just can't bring myself to think that Insidious is anything above mid-tier. Now, why don't I care very much for this version of Insidious? Honestly, it just comes down to a lack of care or passion for creating this one. They just threw in some scenes from the newest movie for the first half, which included a big room that was only there just to gross people out, and then the second half was just a rehash of 2017's second half, word for word, bar for bar. There was no story being told, and there weren't any threads tying all the scenes together. It was just a collection of scenes from the movie. Honestly, I can't even call them scenes here in this maze, they're more like moments. I want to say we saw these events through the lens of the red-faced demon because the facade is this layer, and he does get the most attention, but it's still not very clear. All the other ghosts got done so dirty, and they only made measly cameos. Yes, there are some good scares in here, but I think this easily could have been much scarier. They do the classic hallway of dummies with some hidden scare actors trick, but it was such a tiny room and there was only one actor pretending to be a dummy. There was also one thing I noticed about Insidious: the voice acting from the maze audio was super corny. I don't understand why they didn't just pull the dialogue from the movies and include it in the audio. I think that's what they did last time.
Don't you dare! Don't you dare!
It honestly took me out and someone broke the immersion for me. So yeah, like I said, I don't hate this maze. It was cool to revisit these characters and environments, but there's nothing about this version that's really innovative or exciting. It seemed like John Murdy didn't really care about Insidious this time around, so he and his team kinda half-assed this maze. I hope y'all understand why it's at 7 for me. My number 6 is going to be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Legacy of Leatherface. When this got announced, I noticed a lot of fans were genuinely excited to revisit this franchise, and I thought it was taking crazy pills. I thought to myself, really? Y'all don't get tired of seeing the same old every other year? It's one thing to waste a slot on the maze lineup with something we've seen before, it's another when we've seen it 1,000 times. I believe there is such a thing as too much Leatherface. I was this maze's biggest hater and I could not be any less excited for it. But I'll be damned, it was actually pretty decent. I like the slaughterhouse setting. Not only did it make this maze unique from the other ones, but it made for some pretty gory environments. All of the scare actors here did a pretty good job playing their characters. The maze overall was a nice surprise, but obviously it's not that high in my ranking. So why is that? I just can't bring myself to get too excited for something I've seen a bunch of times at HHN. There are only so many times where I can go, oh my god, it's Leatherface. Oh my god, it's Chop Top. Oh my god, it's a guy getting his face peeled off. Grandpa, grandpa, grandpa. I just got that feeling of deja vu throughout the whole thing. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with Texas Chainsaw. Admittedly, placing it at only 6 is just personal bias. Number 5 is going to be The Weeknd Nightmare Trilogy. Now, from my understanding, the last Weeknd house was a very love-or-hate attraction in the Horror Nights community. I personally really enjoyed it. I saw it less as a traditional Horror Nights maze and more as a unique walkthrough experience based on one of the biggest artists of our generation. So I was looking forward to seeing what The Weeknd and John Murdy had in store for us this year. Right off the bat, the facade was jaw-dropping. Definitely the best facade of the year, and it might even be one of the greatest they've ever made here in Hollywood. So seeing that while jamming to the music got me so pumped up during my first time, and I can't lie, that definitely played a huge part of my honeymoon phase. Now, I didn't dislike this house as time went on, but I did start to notice some interesting observations. Now, I did enjoy most of the set pieces as they were very unique looking. I also like the look of a lot of the characters. I do appreciate them trying to give this one more of a horror vibe compared to the last one, but where this maze loses me is with the story, or rather a lack of. One of my favorite things about After Hours Nightmare was that there was a natural progression of a story. It wasn't just a compilation of scary stuff happening while Save Your Tears just happens to be playing in the background. That is kind of what we got here in Nightmare Trilogy. Maybe the maze will make more sense once The Weeknd's upcoming album drops, but as of now, it's just weird, creepy imagery just for the sake of being weird and creepy. Another big issue I have with this house are the harsh transitions. Back when they made This Is the End as a maze, they made an effect where a spotlight just shines on you. And ever since then, they love reusing that effect. And they had like 4 of these spotlights in Nightmare Trilogy. But it sucks because while I'm admiring the production value, the flow of the house just comes to a screeching halt every time I quote unquote blinded by the lights. It just makes the pacing very awkward. So overall, there is a lot to appreciate with Nightmare Trilogy, but if I'm being honest, I kind of prefer After Hours Nightmare. Alright, now we've arrived at the halfway point of the ranking. And honestly, I saw myself having a similar situation as last year, where I was set on my bottom 4, but it was very difficult to come up with my top 4, because my 4 favorites were just so good, and if someone said any of these were their favorites, I would say, yeah, your pick is valid. But after experiencing these houses a few more times, and after doing a lot of thinking, I'm not pretty comfortable with my top 4. So, kicking off the top 4 is a house that I feel so bad putting at only 4 because it's so good. And that house is going to be Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Oh man, just saying that hurt me. Because again, I love this house, but I just prefer the other 3. I loved the first Ghostbusters maze, and I was curious how they were going to make Frozen Empire work in a haunted attraction. You could tell everyone involved in the making of this house had so much fun. It hit all the right beats for both the Frozen Empire movie and the Ghostbusters franchise in general. The comedic side of the maze worked just as well as the spooky side. They did such a great job bringing all the characters and environments to life. The maze overall was such a delight. However, I do have only one issue with it. Black walls. Funnily enough, I think the first version of Ghostbusters had this problem as well. There were a lot of cool scenes filled with awesome special effects and actors who clearly understood what maze they were in, all interrupted by a bunch of black walls. It was like the creative team didn't know how to transition from one room to the next. But other than that, Frozen Empire was so much fun, right on par with the first maze. My number 3 is going to be Monstruos, the Nightmares of Latin America. The first Monstruos was my favorite house of last year, and this one was my most anticipated of this year, and it did not disappoint. Monstruos was a very solid addition to this universe. The monsters they decided to represent were pretty cool. I love how all of them had red glowing eyes, keeping up with that nightmare theme from this version. I just love how weird and creative John Murray gets with these mazes. They always end up being such bangers because of that. If I had to nitpick, I'll probably say that I think it's a little too similar to the first one. Like for example, first monster gets a couple rooms, second monster gets to lurk in a bunch of tunnels, and the third gets the most love and even gets a giant animatronic head near the end. But I mean, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So yeah, not much to say about Monstruos. It's incredibly well made and it's pretty scary as expected. Now, I had an interesting dilemma. I thought I had my number 1 locked in for the longest time. I thought to myself, yeah, this maze is gonna be my number 1 for sure. Even when I first experienced it, it blew me away so much that I thought I've seen enough. Like no other maze is gonna top that one. But the last couple run-throughs for both of these remaining houses really made me do some thinking. I thought long and hard, and I came to the conclusion that my 1 and 2 should be switched. So my number 2, which for a while was my number 1, is gonna be A Quiet Place. I'm telling you guys, when I first experienced this house, I was flabbergasted. I had modest expectations and they were hella exceeded. When I saw that the facade was simply just the title, I thought to myself, oh geez, it's gonna be one of those mazes, isn't it? Whoa, no, it was not. I laid my eyes on that first alien puppet and I thought to myself, okay, alright, that's cool. Then I saw the house and I was like, oh my god, they really did make more space in this venue. Then I saw the full body animatronics and I was like, dude, this is amazing. The maze just had one spectacular scene after another. There was never a dull moment. The whole thing felt grandiose and epic, but they managed to make some of the scares up close and personal. Yeah, it was love at first sight when it came to A Quiet Place. There were even little more details that I noticed in my later runs, like the sand trails on the floor and how well casted the human characters were. I noticed a lot of Horror Nights fans have this at like their bottom 3 and I'm like, why? People complained about too many aliens and like not enough variety in the scares. The variety part I completely understand, but imagine witnessing state-of-the-art puppetry and animatronics and complaining that there's too much of them. Y'all need to understand this. This is a huge stepping stone for Horror Nights. With last year's Chucky house and now this, Universal has now realized the potential with all this technology and special effects. We could see characters we couldn't even imagine seeing at Horror Nights before. But yeah, A Quiet Place is definitely an all-timer. I haven't been this immersed in a Horror Nights maze since probably Alien vs Predator. Yeah, It was that good. My number one, the one that made me realize at the last minute just how good it was, is Dead Exposure Death Valley. Now, I've always really enjoyed this one throughout the whole season. The best way I could describe this house is that it's basically a not scary farm maze with the Horror Nights budget. The concept was interesting and made for some really cool looking environments and characters, especially this scene stealer.
The monkey chain! The monkey's fist! The monkey!
The maze also had a lot of really good scares. There was even a trigger scare in the facade, which I don't think I've seen before. There was also one scare that I thought was genuinely brilliant. A lot of the rooms and hallways had this like quarantine looking plastic on the walls, but halfway through the maze, a zombie actually comes out of that plastic. I remembered that one getting me really good. But honestly, my favorite aspect of Dead Exposure was how Murdy and his team really went all out with this concept. There were different kinds of zombies and radioactive creatures throughout the whole house. I also really loved the finale, mostly because of the colors. The barrels with the faces inside of them was a nice touch. I think that was an homage to Return of the Living Dead. So yeah, Dead Exposure was great. But what made me convince myself that this was my favorite of the year and not Quiet Place? Well, it's quite simple really. It was the scare actors. Before experiencing it, I thought if done right, then Dead Exposure would be the Scarecrow of 2024. And I was absolutely right, mostly because of the cast. With a house like Quiet Place, you had to act like the characters from the movie. But with an original like Dead Exposure, you can have a little bit more freedom with your role and be as aggressive as you can be. And the scare actors here understood that assignment and went all out. So shout out to the cast of Dead Exposure. You guys were awesome and got only better throughout the run. And y'all are the reason why your house is my number one of 2024. Now let's talk about this year's Terror Tram, which was Blumhouse themed. Quick shout out to me in February. I predicted this theme and apparently manifested it to existence. But if you ask me, the only thing I can think of is probably Horrors of Blumhouse. You know, just have a bunch of Blumhouse characters invade the backlot and stuff. You know, that seems like a safe and easy option as of now. Anyway, I'm gonna rip this band-aid right off. I did not like this year's tram. And it sucks because it looks like the creative team actually took the time to change up the usual layout a bit. It was divided into little segments with each of them having a facade and a few tableau scenes. But everything else surrounding all that was what ruined it for me. Every year there's a pre-show video that plays like on the little tram TVs, setting out the premise or the theme of the Terror Tram, but this year they had nothing. I think it would have been really cool if someone like Megan hijacked the tram and sent us to our impending doom, but they didn't do anything like that. It was behind the screams all over again. The movies they decided to include were just so uninspired, just stuff we've already seen before. Where's Insidious? Where's Split? Where's Get Out? No Ma? No Truth or Dare? Imaginary? Speak No Evil? Sinister? The finale was originally themed to the new Wolfman, but I think because of all the silliness surrounding this guy, it was replaced with characters that we just saw earlier in the tram. Five Nights at Freddy's, Blumhouse's biggest movie right now, gets a measly photo op at the drop-off area. So yeah, I thought this year's tram was a flop. I think I even recommended skipping it entirely on my vlog. Again, I do appreciate them trying to do something different with the layout, but the inclusion of the Blumhouse characters was just flat out lazy.
Don't be intimidated, Squidward. Try to imagine him in his underwear. Oh no, he's hot!
Now, let's talk about everything else. Let's quickly discuss the scare zones first. Now, if you're new to my channel, just know that I am the biggest critic of Halloween Horror Nights scare zones. Back then, they really went all out with them, but due to a number of reasons, they've been severely watered down as of recent. Every scare zone from, I want to say, since 2021, maybe even 2019 and onward, have been extremely lackluster. And for this year, all but one of them were no exception. Chainsaw Punks was mid. You wouldn't have any idea that we're going for like a punk aesthetic. Skull Lords was just there, but I will say the masks were pretty cool looking. And as far as luchadores go, the content is fun, and the actors were always having a blast, but again, there aren't that many cool props or decor to make it feel complete. But then we have Murder of Crows. It's a very small scare zone, but it actually packs quite a punch. Of course, you have the stilt walkers who are always having so much fun, but there were also a few other characters walking around to add a little bit more variety. Yes, there's only one small diorama in the middle of the scare zone, but there's only so much you could do with that much space. But the star of the show here is the baby crow, a whole animatronic baby bird that was made specifically for a scare zone located in front of a construction site. Just absolutely amazing. I love how the crow family just keeps evolving every single year. I don't know, I just find it so wholesome. Just so much care and attention was put into that little area. They need to have that energy with all of the scare zones. Murder Crows is everything that I've been wanting in the scare zones for years. If they brought it back next year, I would not complain at all. Next up are the shows. Let's quickly get Purge Dangerous Waters out of the way first. It's more or less the same thing as last year, although I did notice they ramped up the brutality with a lot of the fight scenes, which is cool. You can never go wrong with more bloody carnage. Overall, Purge was still a good time. Then there's Late Night with Chucky. Oh my days. This was a complete misfire. I knew we weren't gonna get Insult Emporium 2.0, but geez, it was like they didn't even try. The voice actor who played Chucky had no charisma and sounded nothing like him. The fan submitted questions, which by the way aren't really submitted by the fans, the questions were all scripted, were funnier than Chucky himself. And get this, the first time I saw the show, the guy who plays Jake from the TV show was in attendance and actually got pulled up on stage and asked Chucky his own question. Now this was a perfect opportunity for the voice actor to flex his ad-libbing abilities and like his improv, and he flopped.
When are you gonna turn me back into a human?
Well, I'm not a monster, Jake.
You know, I've heard that before, but you've kind of ruined my entire life and killed my whole family.
I kind of like what you and I have going on, Jake. I need a good rivalry. I think you and I can both agree that Andy Barkley's best years are behind him.
Overall, Late Night with Chucky was incredibly corny, way too PG friendly for my liking, and just overall just a flop. I really hope they don't bring this back next year. Finally, I want to share a couple more random thoughts regarding this year's event. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, crowds were really bad last year, so how were they this year? Did Universal actually do anything to beat the reopen soon allegations? Well, I'm not sure if anything drastic happened, but crowds were definitely not as bad as 2023's. Yes, there were still 2-hour waits, but that's to be expected because the event is so popular. I don't even think I've seen any waits reach 3 hours, so either they actually did something drastic or they must have really messed up last year. It's hard to say. The only difference I noticed with the crowd control was that there were a lot more people in the black robes enforcing people to keep on moving throughout the mazes and stuff. I also noticed a lot of people complaining about those maze hosts, saying like, oh, they ruin the experience, they break the immersion, they let way too many people in at a time, some of them are just flat out rude. Like, you're gonna complain about operations doing their job? Okay, sure, whatever. But yeah, I do have a feeling operations took things a bit more seriously this time around, which I am okay with. Also, another thing, are we all just gonna ignore the fact that the music that plays in the stairway is just a complete downgrade from years past? I always complain about the dubstep that plays in the scare zones, but at least I always had the escalators to cleanse my ears. The escalators, if you guys don't know, play classic rock and like heavy metal, you know, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Dio, Motorhead, like the go-to playlist for a Halloween event. But then just suddenly out of nowhere, they just play generic pop music, you know, like Dua Lipa, DJ Khaled, and like all other like songs you hear like on TikTok or something. They started doing that last year, and like I was really hoping Universal didn't do that again, but they did it again.
This is espresso. We hope you love it, Coachella.
Did all the teenagers that attend the event complain about the quote-unquote old head music? If so, I'm about to throw some hands. Bring back the rock music, Universal. And that is the note that I'm actually going to be ending my review on. So, that's Halloween Horror Nights 2024. Like I said, I only attended 4 times, but with those 4 times that I went, I think I can confidently say that I enjoyed the event more than last year. Mainly because lines were tolerable this time around. The houses overall were great. The only attractions I would call like not good were probably Terror Tram and Chucky. But yeah, I cannot wait to see what's in store for 2025. And that's also going to wrap up today's video. If you like what you saw, go ahead and give this video a like. If you want to see more content like this, go ahead and click the subscribe button. If you've attended Halloween Horror Nights this year, what was your favorite maze? What was your least favorite maze? What did you think of the Terror Tram? Any thoughts regarding this year's event? Let me know down in the comments. If you stuck around to the very end of this video, thank you so much for watching. And until then, see you all in the fog.